Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Freitag. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Instruction Partners, and I'm so glad today to be launching a new learning series with Dr. Alfred Tatum and Superintendent of Schools in Haywood County, Joey Hassell. And I'm so glad to be joined by Jabari Sims, my colleague, as the co-interviewer. So Jabari, do you want to do a quick hello?
Yes. Hi, I'm Jabari Sims, Executive Director of District Partnerships here at Instruction Partners. Really looking forward to the conversation today.
And we are so eager to just continue the learning that launched with our Rethinking Intervention series, to continue to engage with researchers who are learning critical things relevant to the practice in K-12 education, and to engage with practitioners leading the work directly. Today, we're going to be focusing on adolescent literacy, particularly focusing on Black boys. What do we know about literacy instruction and the best of what works for African American boys? And we could not be more delighted to have Dr. Alfred Tatum as our featured researcher for this conversation. Dr. Tatum, thank you for joining us, and welcome to the Learning at Instruction Partners.
Thank you. I was glad to receive the invitation.
So I'm going to start by talking to Dr. Tatum a bit, and then Jabari is going to interview Joey, and then we are going to be opening it up for questions and space for some conversation among the four of us, and then opening it up for questions from the audience. Dr. Tatum, would love to have you start by just sharing a story from your own learning journey. We have found these stories to be just so critically connecting, and to give us insight into how you approach the work in K-12. So share with us a story from your journey as a learner and how that informs your perspective.
You know, I like to start by framing how I came into education. I was a finance major. I wanted to make a lot of money. I was a junior in college, and I read an article, newspaper article, that chronicled the failures of Black boys in Chicago. And it was on that day that I went and found the College of Education. I did not know a College of Education existed. And I said, I will do this or engage in teaching for 5 years and go back and become a philanthropist. I came across the word philanthropy in 6th grade, and it was the most gorgeous word. And I said, that's what I want to be. I want to be a philanthropist. And I found out that you have to make a whole bunch of money. But I really fell in love with teaching. And during my first year, there were 4 boys. And I thought I was a great teacher. I would tell the boys, you have no idea how lucky you are to have me as your teacher. But there were 4 boys who stubbornly refused to read the text that I placed in front of them as a social studies teacher. And I just decided to invite these boys to the back of my classroom. And those conversations changed my life. It lit a path to literacy research. And I've been doing this since 1991.
Thank you for that story. So your book, Reading for Their Life, I couldn't put it down the second I started reading it. It's an incredible book. I know you have another book coming out this fall that focuses on elementary school. Mm-hmm. Your book focuses on textual lineages and the importance of understanding textual lineages and engaging with it. Your book dives deeply into how to engage in these textual lineages with students. It also includes a lot of original poetry that I just loved reading. So I'd love to just share a snippet of your poem, Brother Author, and ask you a little bit about that poem, and then how it connects to what you have learned across your career.
Sure.
So, Brother Author, are you out there? Are you out there putting your thoughts together for me? I want to situate myself comfortably in your pages as you write about uncomfortable truths. You don't have to be nice to me, just be fair. I can handle it. Another stanza at the end. I need to find you, Brother Author, so that I can find myself. I showed up again today, and again, nothing. I stared at the pages, and I did not hear you speaking to me. You were not there to tell me who I am and what I can become. Tomorrow, brother author, I hope I find you. I am still looking, waiting, praying, crying. Until then, I just don't know. Would you mind telling us a little bit about this poem and how it connects to your work and your findings?
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I have not revisited that poem in some time, but Brother Authors was really coinage that came from the 1960s. And so you had Black males who engage in struggle. They were reading Stokely Carmichael. They were reading Before the Mayflower. They were reading a whole range of texts across the international landscape, Mao Zedong. But what I found when I started teaching was that young boys were absent of these brother authors. These were authors who caused you to be, do, or think differently as a result of what you read. But surprisingly, it wasn't just the boys who were struggling. It also included our highest performing Black male students. So it dawned on me that we have a lot of students across the academic continuum who are being underserved by text. And effectively, as we were focusing on reading skills and strategies, we were severing their relationships with text in the social sciences and the natural sciences. I'll give you another personal story. All of my brother authors were sociological in nature. So I could recite Invictus, the poem. I recall reading the Declaration of Independence. I recall reading James Baldwin, Dick Gregory, all of the Richard Wright, Black Boy, all of these texts were texts that I experienced in schools. But when I looked at my scientific lineage, it was blank. Now here I am, a high performance student. I would have read physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, but for some reason, someone, whether advertently or inadvertently, turned down the volume of text. And I think that's one of the greatest miscarriages of teaching, when we sever students' relationships with text, because texts are tools of protection in both the social and the natural disciplines. And that's a grave misjustice in education.
I've noticed recently you have spoken out about concern about how much focus is placed on basic and proficient reading and how little concern we're bringing to advanced reading. Can you bring us in on that a little bit more?
Yeah, somehow about 10 years ago, I said, well, let me examine literacy authorizations. What's being authorized in schools, by districts, by the nation. And we have this ongoing reporting of basic levels and proficient levels. And they're very low, but data we do not report are advanced levels. So as a nation, we've just surrendered the idea that we could move our students towards advanced levels of reading, writing, and intellectual development. It's not in our school improvement plans. It's not in district-wide plans. And for whatever reason, I find that deeply problematic because, and this is across all ethnic groups. I know we're talking about Black boys today, but there are very few states that have more than 15% of students across all ethnic groups reading at an advanced level. It's almost taboo to talk about advanced levels of reading, writing in this nation. And I'm not necessarily locking it into a reading score per se. If we look at the histories of writing among all ethnic groups and say, well, this was excellent reading, evidence of excellent reading, evidence of excellent writing, and how do we transport that into our classrooms today? We are grossly missing the mark. We have authorized slow growth. We have authorized underperformance. And that really interrupts, I think, the intellectual development of our nation's children writ large.
Mm-hmm. You do not mince words in your book about what you think about reading strategy instruction. But for the audience, why don't you bring some of that perspective to bear? What have you found? What have you seen? And what effect do you think it has?
Skills and strategies are absolutely foundational. You can't teach reading unless you know how to teach reading. You can't teach reading with good looks. You can't teach reading with good intentions. You have to be you have to know how to teach reading. But that's only foundational. If we want to move to an exponential growth in reading, it's how do we combine excellent reading instruction with excellent text to build these agendas for our nation's children? So the sublime question is not how we teach skills and strategies, but how do we think about high quality instruction, high quality text to shape positive life outcome trajectories. And it's very important. We have too many of our nation's children, particularly our Black boys, surrendering their life chances before they get to know their life choices. If I enter an environment and there's an imbalance between how I'm living and what we're teaching, we become inadvertent accomplices to students' underperformance, and for some students, their deleterious outcomes.
Would love to hear more across the last 20 years of your work. You started us with a story from your early days of teaching. You've continued in both research and academia and in practice and in a number of different pursuits. Across that work, what has surprised you? What did you not expect to be true that you found to be true?
The most glaring omission has been the small amount of research that's been conducted with Black boys. So if I think about 4 million Black boys across the US, and there's been a grand narrative about this is a state of emergency. But when I looked across the nation, in the last 20 years, for example, there were only 49 studies conducted solely focused on Black boys. Now, no one would expect that to be the case. Very few studies are conducted in rural areas. Very few studies are conducted in the primary grades, which should be really, really surprising. Mm-hmm. And very few studies are conducted with high-performing boys. So we're making assumptions or decisions about advancing the literacy development of Black boys on a very small research base. And most of these studies involve less than 40 participants. So if we're in search of truth, we don't have robust research infrastructure that focuses on Black boys. So that's why I always take caution, or I talk about specific research studies that I've been conducted without overgeneralizing until we create a more robust research base.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In your research that you have conducted, is there anything that you felt like you've really confirmed, like there was something you might have suspected that you really found to be true in terms of what does work with Black boys and in literacy instruction?
Well, the first thing I will confirm is there is no such thing as a Black male reading strategy. Mm-hmm. The strategies are the same for all students. I've also found that when you teach reading in powerful ways and you couple that with writing, that makes a profound difference in their lives, because reading text puts Black boys in contact with other people. Writing text puts them in contact with themselves. Mm-hmm. I have also found that this whole notion of putting text in front of boys that's relevant is a gross form of neglect. Sometimes these boys
say more there. Yeah.
You know, you don't know what's relevant to you unless you experienced it. And so what we do is we turn down the volume of text, we expose them to a limited frame, but they are, I found Black boys who are as equally engaged with designer genes from an engineering perspective, boogers from a biological perspective, black holes, algorithms. So no one would say, for example, if you go to a black boy, what are you interested in reading? He probably not going to say algorithms if you never experienced them. So in the US, for example, there's a lot of focus on racial profiling. I said, let's discuss facial profiling. Now, this is a few years ago. More people are talking about facial profiling now because it's using a mathematical algorithm. And so I started having black boys write about the algorithms of self. I can go across all of the disciplines, but this suggested to me that we have to widen or move beyond a narrow lens of scholarship and search for truth in search of that may be different from seeking cultural comfort alone. If I was writing a poem today, I'm feeling pretty sick now. I would say black boys need cough medicine too. But if I'm not studying cough medicine or from a medical perception, I have to rely on other communities to protect me. And so it's how do we build agendas for black boys and making sure that they have text across all the academic disciplines without without subscribing to narrow forms of scholarship. Oh, I want to say the exact thing. And I've said this before, all text belong to all black boys. And sometimes that's not taken up forcefully enough in our nation's classrooms.
I did wonder as I was reading your book, we've talked to some folks like Edie Hirsch, folks who are advocating for a common knowledge base. I think there's, a lot of debates about the canon. Should we establish a canon? Who should be in the canon? I'd be curious, given how much your textual lineage work really looked at for an individual, the textual lineages that really drive them, how you think about the concept of a canon.
If I think about pillars of text, canonical text fits there. And so when I studied the textual lineage of black males, you had many who were wedded, and I'll go back 300 years. You had many who were wedded or had their lives transformed by traditional canonical text. And some of these canonical texts are beautiful. I mean, they're really, really beautiful pieces of writing, even though they may be laced with some racist epithets. But when you look at some of the writers, and not all canonical texts are laced with racial epithets, but if you look at canonical text, it's a beautiful, beautiful piece of writing. So if I'm teaching canonical text to nurture the next generation of writers of canonical text, that's very different. So now I'm studying the artist. So we have to ask the question, to what end do we want to use these texts? Not to celebrate a generation past, but are we lighting a new pathway forward? Historians study history. Canonical texts are part of our history. I mean, it just begins to emerge. But if you're reading canonical texts, but it's also complemented by a wide range of text across the disciplines, you get a new appreciation for those texts. If we're reading text in isolation, we miss the mark. How do we start thinking about text from a universal perspective so that I can travel in and out of text? So I can write a professional book and I might have a canonical slippage in there. Or I can write a professional book and have a medical slippage in there, or philosophical slippage. It's not our responsibility to deny our students text. We have to give them the right to say, this does not, situate well with me. And then they can make their decisions writ large.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tatum. I'm going to hand it over to Jabari to talk to Joey Hassell and reflect on our conversation, and then we'll circle all together.
Yeah, I just appreciate you, Dr. Tatum. I especially appreciate the call to action that I just finished my own doctoral studies, where I saw there wasn't a lot of research done around Black men as I was studying retention. So I just see a call to action there, but also for teacher preparation programs as they're preparing the next generation of teachers to really tap into really understanding and getting to know their students and getting to know the text as well. And then also for existing teachers as well around, let's go beyond the surface. You know, if I see that you're interested in becoming a basketball player or a rapper or something like that, that there's more diversity for Black students, for all students. And it's really upon the teacher to really get to know and really develop an authentic relationship with each one of their students, understand what their interests are, and really raise the level of expectation and bar to expose them to a greater variety of literature. So I just appreciate that call to action from you. And also, you know, in thinking about textual lineages, I started to think about my own experience of like literature and like, when did I really fall in love with like reading? And I think it, you know, for me, it was around third or fourth grade, we were doing a poetry unit, and little Jabari was not particularly excited about poetry. And my teacher at the time, she gave me Mother to Son to read. And I read it by Langston Hughes. And so I read it and I was like, oh, I like this poem. It sounds like how we talk in Louisiana, you know? The grammar wasn't standard English, but like I found a familiarity with it. And then she pushed me around, well, what do you mean? What do you think the author means by crystal stare? Like, what does that mean? And like pushing me around metaphors and like, why would a mother be saying that to her son? And it just got me to like really critically think and really push, you know, me to really go beyond what is it I'm reading to like, am I truly understanding what I'm reading? So I thank you for just having me go back and just reflect upon my own textual lineage in that way.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
And so would also want to turn to you, Joey, Mr. Hassell, I call you both. You know, we are grateful for our partnership that we've had with you with Haywood County Schools in Tennessee. You've been a long partner with us at Instruction Partners. And for me personally, I got to know the Haywood community even more so and understand it this past spring when we started to engage in some work around affirming relationships and really started to explore together as partners, what does it really mean for all students inside of the district to really being seen, valued, to feel a sense of belonging. And so I just appreciate the partnership that we've been able to have, especially as, you know, you have a very large percentage of Black boys inside of your district, and just your own ability to really step inside the work. What we realized is that, you know, before we started engaging with teachers, that it really meant that for all of us as leaders, that we had to start to look at ourselves and understand our own values and the biases and our identities before we start to engage in the work. And that's some of the work that we started this spring. So I just appreciate you joining the conversation today, and also just appreciate that we've been able to really open up even more so and be even more vulnerable as we engage in the work. So thank you for that. Anything else you want to add about or share about the Haywood context?
Yeah, Jabari, just, you know, for the listeners, we are a district of about 2,800 students, a little more. But of that, 66% of our population is Black African American, a little over 1,800 of our students. And of that, 934 are Black males. So 33% of our total student population are Black males. And so as we've thought about the work that we've done with Instruction Partners and directly with our staff to improve, you know, it's never lost on me that you know, our students, they don't look like me. I'm a white male, and the majority of our students are Black male, Black female. So it's so important that we do explore and understand and really get to the root of an educational environment where all students, you know, are safe, they're seen, they're respected and valued, and we know names, strengths, and needs, and we really create opportunity and access. And that's what what happened with our affirming relationships work at the high school, we were really looking at, when we started with just unconscious bias with our staff, and we recruit for diversity. But when you think about Tennessee, just the teachers available in Tennessee, we have a larger percentage of minority teachers, but we are a majority white staff. So in order for us to do and serve and ensure that our students have the opportunities they need, we have to really look at ourselves, look inward, and then have some real, at times, uncomfortable conversations about maybe things that we've put up that are barriers for students. So when we think about, our district, what we have done is really with the partnership with instruction partners through the affirming relationships, but also through our work with high quality instructional materials, we've really focused on curriculum that creates the opportunity and access to multiple texts across the unit, not just a novel that they read or, a nonfiction piece, but actually a unit that includes literary informational text that really tells a complete story with varying views. So students have the opportunity to dive into that. And, one of the things I think about, Jabari, is my own experience, as an educator. It goes back almost 30 years ago, and I'm a native Tennessean, and most of my career has been in West Tennessee. But I took a job as a special ed teacher. It was self-contained. Students were with me all day. I had 24 students. 22 of the 24 were Black students. And I think of those students today still because they taught me more. When I think of my life as a learner, and Emily's heard me tell this story even while we were at the department together, like that group of students, specifically the 22 of the 24 that didn't look like me, taught me more about what I needed to do as a teacher and leader than any course or anything that was out there that I had access to. And what I learned was that basically, and you say this, Dr. Tatum, is basically we had put this group of students on a path where they were not getting access to text that could have changed, academic outcomes for them. I think I did a great job, but with them that year, I wouldn't say great, but a decent job. I was brand new, but like just the fact that they were isolated so young and placed in a self-contained setting, probably not because of their inability to learn, but probably because their lack of opportunity to learn because of maybe behaviors or rules that had them removed from settings. And so I say that to say, like, my career as a leader, as a principal, and then as a superintendent in multiple districts has really been about creating access and opportunities for students, and specifically, our students of color in the districts that I've served. And I think it starts with the ability to read and the knowledge building that is so important for our students.
Thank you for sharing that, Joey. As you think, even more about the work that Dr. Tatum is discussing related to just advancing literacy for Black boys, where have you seen progress, and where's some areas that you want to work on?
Well, I think one area where we have seen progress is, we have implemented strong, high quality literacy materials across the district in K-12. We have EL education in K2, and then we use Bernstein's guidebooks in 312. So I think one area is that we've got the implementation. We're starting year 4 for our work in 312. We're in year 3 for our work in K2. So the implementation and the opportunity and access for all students, we don't level. There's no leveled readers or no leveled text anymore. All kids have access to that. So I think that's an area where we've seen improvement. And I think and it's we had the curriculum matters or the knowledge Matters group that came in and did a tour with us, and some of the IP team was with us that day. But we had a young man in 8th grade who talked about the unit on sugar, where they looked about sugar production and trade and how it had an impact on the economic and social course of our history. And there was a young man in that group, a Black male, who was an 8th grader. And I remember him telling the folks that were interviewing him, he told them, he's like, I have kids, our peers in my classroom, who are showing up every day just because they want to be involved in the dialogue and the conversation about the text we're reading. And that was knowledge building. And it was, it was history, and it was real history, and the kids were having dialogue about that. So that's a big strength for us. And through that, we've seen, success with the Socratic Seminar, like the engagement with our students across the board has been substantial with that. An area where I think we need to continue to work, and I hear the words of Dr. Tatum and know what we need to be doing, but I feel like our writing work has got to grow, because I think what we know is happening in our classrooms, especially 3rd grade on, our students are writing more than they ever have. And if you go into let's say a 3rd grade classroom, you may have 18 students, and you're going to see 18 different experiences writing. Well, they do that. So by the time they get to 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th grade, we should expect more. The writing should be more meaningful, should be coherent. Like, we have to really build on that foundation. And it's not, I think your words about, the writing is that personal, I'm not using the right words here, but it's that internal connection. It's where the individual shows that they're making the connections, and the ability to expand and all that has to happen. So we have to definitely improve in the writing aspect of our work. And of course, we have not arrived and we're nowhere near arriving, but we are seeing improvement, and some of the other work that we're doing there, where we've seen improvement outside of just the high quality materials, is our work. We've engaged with Facing History and ourselves, and part of our affirming relationships work with instruction partners has been to look at those Facing History protocol and really create an advisory and a setting and an environment in our school where, we know that there are staff members who know every student by name, they know their strength, their needs, they value the students, but also that the students, like we said, they're safe, they're seen, they're respected and valued, and really just growing lifelong learners through not only the high quality content we're putting, but by the relationships we're building, so they have a safe space to talk to someone that's good.
Thank you.
Well, let's create some space for conversation across y'all. We've done these sort of mini interviews, but Director Hassell, what questions do you have for Dr. Tatum and vice versa? Well,
something he said early on, and I may not have captured this correctly, but when we think about text as a tool of protection, that just really resonated with me. So I just say a little bit more about that, because I think when I think about the work we're doing with our students, I envision what you mean there, but I'm just curious as to, what's that mean for our students that are in front of us every day?
So I'll put it in this, I'll put it along a trajectory. Text can be a tool of psychological protection. I just know who I am. That's my identity. Text can be a tool of personal protection. I'm protecting my right to have access to higher levels of thought. Text can be a sense of community protection. And so I become smart I started looking at what's happening in my community in very different ways. And then this personal protection also. Gender protection too. I mean, girls and boys sort of think about their identities in a lot of different ways. So that's the immediacy. So that's where I I put a wide range of texts across them. I'll give a clear example, and then I'll talk about longer. I had students, elementary age students, studying the gut. I introduced them to this word diverticulitis, just as a challenging word for them in 3rd grade. And the question was, how do you poop? Do you sit or do you squat? And they found out that your bowels move roughly a few seconds faster if you squat as opposed to sitting. Now, I can take that knowledge and build a personal agenda in terms of sitting or squatting. But then it connected them to internationally. Well, every nation does not sit on toilets. If you travel to China, for example. So that's personal projection. You can take this knowledge and actually do something about it, but you're learning how to read and write. But I'm going to talk about it from my perspective as a university administrator. When I look across the academic disciplines, I see the erasure of Black males. I don't see them in Francophone studies. I don't see them in philosophy. I don't see them in a lot of areas. But all of these disciplines are needed for a community to protect themselves. And that's really connected to the role of literacy. And then the last clear example, there was a New York Times article that was written recently. We heard about the death of George Floyd and Mike Brown and some others. But in New York City, if Black men were dying from chokeholds, they were attributing it to sickle cell anemia. They said the cause of death was sickle cell anemia. Well, if you're not studying sickle cell anemia as a young Black man or a young Black woman, you have no way to protect yourself in the sciences. We heard about the water crisis in Flint, Michigan. If you're not studying water, you have to wait for someone outside of the community. So there was a woman from outside of Flint, Michigan, who came in and talked about the water in Flint, Michigan. Well, you had all of these African-American residents in Flint, Michigan. Why weren't they positioned to protect themselves against the water crisis? So that's what I mean by a tool of protection in both the sciences and the natural sciences. You even have to understand laws and voting rights. So it's not just the sciences, it's the social sciences. So how do you ensure that our students develop both social and scientific consciousness as a result of the text they're reading, so they can protect themselves immediately, protect their posterity, and protect their future trajectories? Mm-hmm. Hopefully those were illustrative examples.
Yes, sir. That was great. And I think as leaders, what we have to ensure is that our students have access to those opportunities and push back on anything that might limit those opportunities for students. Like
and
that.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. Yeah.
I would be remiss if I didn't say this, but our students must be able to protect themselves at the word level. They must be able to decode. Mm-hmm. They must be able to protect themselves at the sentence and the paragraph level. They must be able to read fluently. They must be able to protect themselves at the text level. They must be able to monitor their comprehension, and they must be able to comprehend the text. So I was talking about the grand, sublime forms of protection, but when you couple that with protecting yourself at the word level, the sentence level, the text and the paragraph level, then the possibilities are endless for our students.
Yes, sir. And I think what we know through the cognitive research is that the decoding and encoding that's necessary for our kids to be able to do, like, that's very much about us training and teaching and creating those opportunities for students. And that a large part of our work is to get it right in K2. And we've created some barriers because we've not been consistent for every student across every classroom, across every grade level. Yeah. And so, yes, sir, I really appreciate that. That's my literacy love language there you're talking.
And I would like to hear. Go ahead, sir.
I was talking mainly about reading there, but I said writing is equally powerful as a tool of protection. When I looked at the archives, Black boys and Black men wrote for 4 primary reasons: to define self, to nurture resilience, to engage others, and to build capacity. And that's what I wrote about in my book, Fearless Voices. Mm-hmm. So when we think about, well, what are the roles of writing? Emily, this goes back to your question, what did I find out in mm-hmm. the research? To go back to those 4 purposes of writing, are we equipping them to do those 4 things across the social and natural sciences? We never wrote for the state. Mm-hmm. We never wrote for a rubric. Our aims of writing were connected to those 4 literacy platforms.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a clear call to action. I appreciate every time we talk around interdisciplinarity and just maintaining the importance of all the disciplines. We're about 3 years into a practice at Instruction Partners that's deeply focused on science. And I just appreciate how much you keep elevating the connection points. I love the different purposes, and I hear the literary societies of that Dr. Goldie Muhammad talks about in her book, also in some of those purposes. I'd love to dig into just one more question for both of you, and then team, we're going to open this up for questions in 2 minutes. So if you want to start putting them in the chat or the Q&A, feel free to put your own questions in. You talk in the book about those cherished books that really, where you do find identity. And I think the purpose of knowing who I am, you talk about the books that are tattered because you've just read them so many times and the corners are bent down and you've underlined them. And in the conversations we've had, I feel like it points towards leadership moves that Director Hassell, I know you're already doing. Like, how do we make sure we have a knowledge building curriculum? How do we make sure we maintain all of the disciplines? How do we ensure foundational reading skills? There's this more personal side to reading of those books that just form you. And I don't think we often explore as much the independent reading levers that schools have, librarians, the work to just really connect kids with the books that are going to change the way they feel about themselves. Mm-hmm. Can you speak a little bit to anything you have found? And Joey, would love to hear anything you all are thinking about or have done. Dr. Tatum, we'll start with you.
That is critical. Being able to find comfort and cozy up to a book. I mean, it's nothing better than that. I just recall spending time with Judy Blume. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret. I changed the way I pray because of Judy Blume. I would say, are you there, God? It's me. Encyclopedia Brown. It was just, it's just something very comforting to find resonance in the text. Or even find resonance in a particular word. It doesn't have to be the entire text. I don't remember the book, but I remember I came across the word labyrinth in a piece of fiction. I thought that was the most gorgeous word. Labyrinth, and it just stuck with me. But that's why that early literacy is really, really important. Once we give them access to print, they'll fall in love with most of the text that we place in front of them. It's just a sense of accomplishment. Mm-hmm. I mean, I have characters I just remember. I mean, Blubber. I just remember so many Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. I mean, I could just go on and on and on and on. That early literacy, I'll stop here. Literacy doesn't always have to be deep and meaningful. Mm. Sometimes it can be strictly personal and powerful. I want to see kids become able to protect themselves, but I also want to see kids smile.
Mm-hmm.
I love you. Sorry, go ahead, Emily.
I was just going to close by saying, there's a section of the book where you list a bunch of books that you've read and how they changed you.
Yeah.
I know you talk about Black Boy and just how connected that made you feel, but I also love that you talk about, the Odyssey and just the obstacles of the Odyssey. So thank you for all you have contributed to my understanding of textual lineages. All right, we're going to open it up here for questions from anyone on the team. Just feel free to put them into the chat, and then I'll go through and share them. Jabari, I feel like I might have interrupted you though, so I want to come back to you.
No, all good. I think that what I keep hearing is just really allowing children to be curious about the world and being able to tap into that curiosity and connect them to the tools or connect them with the resources that they can learn on their own, and just the power that comes with that's where the freedom and the protection is coming from, and the role of and just changing the role of teacher from just around facilitation of learning. So that was just what's coming up for me.
All right, team, any questions out there? I know people can't quite come off of mute, but if you want to put it into the chat. And actually, I skipped, Joey, bringing the conversation to you on the question of individual reading and anything that came up for you as you think about how to support that personal connection.
Right. So one of the things we're going to do at our high school this year is we have scheduled time during the day, which is our Tomcat time. And that's when they do advisory, but they do advisory once a week or once, every other week, just depending on needs. So we also during that time, do ACT prep. We do work with our seniors on applying for colleges and all of that work. But we also do some intervention needs. But for the students that, that are not in need of the direct support, maybe of the intervention, and really those advancing readers. One of the things we're going to do this year is create time for literacy circles where they are going to read books beyond just the curriculum and beyond what's happening in the classroom. And with that, the principal plans to create opportunity for interest inventories and engage students that way. So I think that's one way that we'll be supporting, in a few months, I can tell you how that's going. But that's one of the things that we're going to do. And then I think broadly, just hearing the conversations about the units that we have, like in 5th grade, we do the making of a scientist where they look at the different scientific theories. Then I think to kindergarten where they are studying weather, and then the work with fossils in 2nd grade, we're making connections outside of just your science block. It's that interdisciplinary stuff talking about the connections that are happening. And I was talking to our middle school principal yesterday, and just based on some universal screening data with Ames Web and then our iReady data, we're seeing, even with COVID, we're seeing in our upper grades improvement in literacy. And I think some of that's just we've created more opportunity for kids to read, and there's dialogue, it's meaningful, they're building knowledge, and the curiosity's coming from what they're talking about. It's not a stale traditional type curriculum that's coming at them. It's they're pulling in current events. So I'm hearing the conversation and hearing and directly from Dr. Tatum today just tells me that while we've got a lot of work to do, we are going to stay the course, because the opportunities that our students have are gonna pay off. And I've told our staff, we're committed to this. We're not going to be changed. You're not going to look up and there's some, willy-nilly new curriculum in front of you. We're going to stay with our units, do the things that work and move forward. So I said a lot there in there, but
I appreciate it.
May I pose a challenge?
Sure.
Because Joy, you're really in the hard work, but I'll tell you one of the transformative questions I ask teachers. So they would often ask me, what types of texts do I put in front of Black boys? So I would throw the question back to them, what philosophy text should I put in front of Black boys? What economics text? What engineering text? It changed the whole way of thinking because it was, how do I then connect those texts to their identities? And I just went across all of the disciplines, and it led to a thoughtful examination of, when we're asking about text, we're really asking about text more broadly.
We have a couple questions from the team. One is, Dr. Tim, how do you think about addressing unfinished learning in reading that has been compounded by the pandemic? So is there any additional lens you would bring to the coming year given interrupted schooling?
If there is a grand distinction between the pacing of reading pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, then we have to do something very differently. And so, for example, as I started, we've been slow walking students through text for a long time. This goes back to Ellis Cole's book. How do we start thinking about an exponential growth of reading? That means having kids read and write across more text simultaneously. Neglect or do away with the slow growth orientation, focus on the exponential growth orientation, because what we're really talking about is increasing the volume of the text. If you increase the volume of the text in both reading and writing, we're not trying to catch up with the loss or the pandemic, we're trying to catch up with the text. Once students catch up with the text, it doesn't matter what happened the year prior or the year beforehand. Same thing with calculus. Once I catch up with calculus, it doesn't matter how I was neglected for calculus. Once I have it, I have it. So don't think about learning loss. That's a common speak that we're using right now. Ask the question, how do we catch students up with the text that we want them to read that gives us evidence they're becoming better readers, they're becoming better writers, and they're smart about something? Has nothing to do with the pandemic.
One other question. Is there any research currently underway that you're excited about?
Yeah. I think as the nation is really trying to figure out two forms of research, I'm excited about the brain and reading from a cognitive perspective, but I'm less excited about it because it doesn't talk about the roles of text and the historical nature of how we thought about reading and writing. So it's odd to get excited about something that you find incomplete, but it gives me a pathway to think about text and the roles that text will play historically while we think about brain-based research. So I'm really excited about that because it really gives us the limitations of some of the things that are being proposed across the nation as it relates to a refocus on decoding, et cetera.
And one final question, Joey, you have talked about a few things that y'all are doing this coming year, but the question is there anything that you are most excited about in the coming year that you think has the promise of really supporting Black boys in literacy?
Probably there's several things I'm excited about, but the one thing I think that can have the largest impact is our reader writer project that we're doing in kindergarten, first and second grade. The team is guiding us through that, but specifically it's rooted in our EL education and specifically focused on the skills block where our students are getting those foundational skills, frequent assessments, and then we're informing the small group instruction for that. But also all students during that time have access to that content knowledge, that knowledge building, that core instruction component where, reading, texts that are above grade level to kids, creating that knowledge base is there. So of all the things, I think our reader writer project where we're focusing on our kindergarten, first and second grade is what excites me the most. And, the whole learning loss thing, we're certainly focused on that, but I appreciated Dr. Tatum's comments, because what I've told our folks is that, it's really just lost opportunity to learn. Like, it's not that, like, it's been a loss of opportunity. It's not that they don't know, just the opportunity wasn't there to learn it. So let's think about it in terms of that opportunity, and certainly, what I'm going to say to our teachers is dive into the units, create those opportunities, and just work on improving readers. But we're super excited about our Reader Writer project. I think we're going to impress a lot of folks with the growth we see.
Very
Yeah,
exciting.
Emily, I'm also excited about the research on superintelligence.
What is superintelligence?
Well, it really talks about how much smarter things can become from a technology perspective. So we have a society focusing on superintelligence on one end of the continuum. And then we're talking about basic and proficient reading on the other end. Those are light years apart. So I recently read the book Genius Makers, and how people really get to know their craft. And so that whole focus on superintelligence and black holes, those are things that some of our boys will never experience if we miss the mark with them moving forward.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Alfred Tatum, Director of Schools, Joey Hassell, my colleague, Jabari Sims. Thank you all for this conversation. Thank you to our team who joined it. I really walk away thinking a great deal about really at the end, this tension and how many challenges we have to solve in education, because there is work to do on foundational skills, and there is work to do on really changing the paradigm. I appreciate all of you, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Great joining you, Joey Hassell, sharing the screen with you and everyone else.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Take care.
Have a great day.